Welcome to the Shalom Hartman Institute Rabbinic webinar. I'm Rabbi Carla Fenves. I'm one of the rabbis here at Congregation Emanu-El in San Francisco. And I'm also really fortunate to be one of the new RLI, Rabbinic Leadership Institute Fellows. So I'll be at Hartman this summer. And we're so lucky this morning to welcome Dr. Tomer Persico to come talk with us about the upcoming Israeli elections. He is a research fellow and scholar in residence at the Shalom Hartman Institute, and he is also right now based in the Bay Area as the Koret visiting assistant professor of Jewish and Israel Studies at UC Berkeley, just across the bay. So we're really going to spend some time trying to understand what's happening in the upcoming elections and how changes in Israeli Jewish identity have influenced the trends that we're seeing in this election cycle. So the plan is for about 40 minutes of teaching, followed by a Q&A session, and several of you sent in questions ahead of time that I've made sure to integrate into the conversation. So here we go.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you for wanting to listen and tuning in. What I want to do is give a real overlay of the way Jewish identity has transformed in Israel really since the founding of the state, and especially for the last 30 years or so, since the 90s. And to see how these transformations, I will present two major trends in manifestations in Jewish identity, how these transformations will play out in the elections, or are already playing out in the elections that are happening in April 9th in Israel. And I want to start just by referring you to, you have the source pages, I assume. I want to refer you to the first two pie charts that I brought, source 1 and source 2. And the years are less important, and the sources are less important, and even the percentages are less important. I just want to make you notice how different the Israeli society is presented in these pie charts. The first, from the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics, presents the usual the classic fourfold division of Israeli society into secular, traditional, religious, Zionist, and ultra-Orthodox. And this is the way the Central Bureau of Statistics has understood Israeli society, and other people also, since the founding of the State of Israel. And I brought another chart here from the Jewish People Policy Institute. And they divide the society in a completely different way. You see, there are many more Jewish identities here. And indeed, I would say you can even further have a further greater colorful spectrum of divergent Jewish identities that have a place, and take a place and have a role today in Israeli society. And really, if you look at Israeli society today, there is a spectrum of ways, different avenues of Jewish identity, ways that people define for themselves their Jewishness. And if we want to ask the question, an interesting question would be, why does the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics still use this way to understand Israeli society? Because really, I would say it's almost completely irrelevant. It's almost does not give us any serious understanding of Israeli society today. And I would say it is because it used to be relevant at the founding of the state in 48, and really through the 80s. This was a reasonable way to understand Israeli society. There are four major sectors, four major ways of defining Jewish identity, of self-definition of people, and you can understand it that way. It is no longer the case. And really, the Central Bureau of Statistics simply is working on inertia and does not understand that it has to update its the way it understands Israeli society. So what I will want to do is talk about how Israeli society has been has grown much past that fourfold division and has become a spectrum of different Jewish identities. And I want to do it, as I said before, by charting out two major trends, two major ways in which Jews in Israel understand their Jewishness. Now we will start with the former way that had lasted until the 90s, with the way that made it so that it was possible to understand Israel through that fourfold division of secular, traditional, religious, Zionists, and ultra-Orthodox. And for that way to work, please, I will refer to source number 3. For that way to look, the major secular Jewish identity had to be what you see in source number 3. And this, we can call him the Hebrew, we can call him the Sabra, we can call him, he had a few names, he had quite a wide semantic field, but he was a certain definite coherent Jewish identity. And that's the identity that the Jewish, the secular Zionist socialist movement developed for itself and for its members, for its sons and daughters. This identity was secular. It was a secular Jewish identity. It was a proactive Jewish identity. It was a socialist Jewish identity. It was a militant Jewish identity. It was many things that the people who coalesced this identity thought were a negation of the diasporic, exilic Jewish identity that they wanted to distance themselves from. This was a new Jew, a new way to be a Jew, a new way to express your Jewishness. You are secular, socialist, democratic, egalitarian. You are bringing benefit and affluence for the entire populace of the land. You are building a model society that is at once, again, egalitarian and just, and is continuing the tradition of the prophets, right? And you are also continuing the tradition of King David and Bar Kokhba. All this coalesced into a specific Jewish identity. And really, the list of characteristics is less important than understanding that this was a specific, robust answer to the question, how am I Jewish? How am I, the secular Zionist, settling in the land of Israel, even before the formation of the state? How am I Jewish? What makes me Jewish? Because, of course, most wanted to be Jewish, wanted to remain Jewish, but not in the way of their fathers and mothers. And this gave them the answer. This was not only a legitimate way to be a Jew, it was considered by them the ultimate way, the best and last Jewish identity needed. That's it. We are now building a model society, etc., etc., etc. Now, this Jewish identity collapsed. This Jewish identity is no longer viable. And the deterioration of the Hebrew, the Sabra, what you see in the pictures there in this sort of Soviet realistic art, it collapsed for a few reasons. A few of them ideological, the disappointment with the labor movement leadership after the Yom Kippur War, 73, how these demigods from the Six-Day War let us down and were not able to protect us in a decent enough way. Another ideological blow, was the 77 Mahapach, what we call the sort of mini revolution when the Likud, the right wing, for the first time ascended to power in Israel. But really, even deeper than the ideological reasons were sociological and economical reasons. Israel during the 70s and the 80s went through processes of privatization. Global economy came in, the market was privatized, different processes of joining the world market, neoliberalism, etc. And this changed not only economics, but society. In a word, privatization was not limited to what we do with the economy. And a new ethos sprung from in Israeli society. Instead of the collectivist, all for one for all sort of ethos of the Hebrew, of the Sabra, of socialist secular Zionism, an individualist ethos ascended, an ethos of self-fulfillment, of career, of affluence. And this ethos changed the way people think of themselves and made this sort of, the Hebrew sort of secular, Zionist, socialist, Jewish identity redundant, obsolete, and really not relevant anymore. Now, when that identity crumbled, it was basically the crumbling of hegemony, the crumbling of the all-encompassing no questions asked, the water that we swim in, basically. And when that collapsed, other voices were able to voice themselves, to come up, to have a go at defining the public sphere and defining themselves. So a very simple example would be the Mizrahi voice, right? For the first time asserting itself, not only wanting a piece of the pie, but really saying, we are an alternative identity to Zionism, to secular Zionism, and we have a different story to tell. What I want to show is how two major trends, as I said, erupted from this fracture of the Hebrew. The first one I call the privatization of religion. And this is sources 4 and 5 on your pages. And this, I imagine you can understand how it comes about. The market was privatized, a new individualist ethos was formed in Israeli society, and of course our relationship with religion, with our tradition, is also privatized. So if the Hebrew, the secular socialist Zionist, was secular but got his or her religious services, let's say, from the orthodoxy, from the chief rabbinate, and it was quite all right with it. Yeah, they are in charge of marriage, they are in charge of burial, etc., etc. Suddenly, the chief rabbinate may be not good enough anymore. We don't think it is the only legitimate source of Judaism, of Jewish services. So, two processes are going on. The first is a formation of a whole marketplace of Jewish spirituality, Jewish intellectual, cultural interest, and we have a pluralistic Batei Midrash, yeshivas, etc., for seculars, and we have Neo-Kabbalah and Neo-Hasidism, and we have prayer groups, and we have different kinds of ways that individual secular Jews mostly, but also some traditional, also some religious Zionists, engage with their tradition anew. And I brought here a quote, number 4 of Chen Tzfoni. I don't know if we have to read it, but this sort of back and forth engagement with tradition that was never before even needed, because the Hebrew, that robust Jewish identity, already answered for you any questions you had about your Judaism. Now this ready-made answer is gone, and we have to form a new answer. How am I Jewish? Well, I'm Jewish because I participate in a prayer group, or I study Kabbalah, or whatever. And we know also that the non-Orthodox types of established Judaism, Reform and Conservative in Israel, have grown over the last 30 years in an amazing way. Because it is also because people are searching for a new way to engage their Jewish identity, and they are no longer taking the chief rabbinate as the sole legitimate source of Judaism. Now, this also affects, obviously, the way people get their religious services. And I've brought in source 5 an article by Judy Maltz from Haaretz, this is January this year, just less than 2 months ago. And as you can see the headline, this is source 5, Fewer Israelis Marrying Through the Rabbinate. The Ministry of Religious Services attributes the drop to general changes in marriage trends. However, the report is evidence of a growing contempt in Israel towards the rabbinate and the power it wields. And indeed, people are Israelis, secular and traditional, and even religious Zionists are less inclined to get married through the chief rabbinate, through the Orthodox, really ultra-Orthodox right now, chief rabbinate. What are they doing? Now in Israel we don't have civil marriage. By law you have to get married to the chief rabbinate. So they're either going abroad, marrying abroad, bringing the certificate back and the state has to recognize it, or they're engaging in makeshift chuppahs, in makeshift ceremonies in which they are not legally registered, but they are expressing their own way of engaging with their tradition. What interests us, what is significant for us, is the fact that people now feel legitimate to do that. The chief rabbinate is now not the only official, certified source for Judaism. So that's the privatization of religion. I would say one avenue, and this also brings about a sort of a liberal attitude, because we know that a survey after survey that tested, that asked people what do they say, let's say about marriage, but it's also about other different issues. Should there be civil marriage in Israel? Over 60% say yes for the last decade or so. Should there be LGBT marriage in Israel? Again, over 60% say yes. Now these 60%, not all of them will marry in a civil way if the option is there. Some will still marry in the chief rabbinate. But there is an attitude of live and let live. We don't all have to be under one such roof. So this avenue, this trend is certainly one of liberalization in the Israeli society. And again, it also takes a form in what you do in your Sabbath. You go shopping. There are many things that are open, malls open in the Sabbath, which were never before. People want public transportation in the Sabbath more than ever before, etc., etc. All sorts of things signifying the privatization of religion, the way people form for themselves their own Judaism. This is one trend. The other trend is what I called in section B here, the growth of ethno-nationalism. And here I want to direct you first to the picture that I myself took. This is in Shuk Machne Yehuda in Jerusalem. And as you see this guy here with the flag, he has a blue and white flag in the middle of which there is the symbol of the temple, the temple in Jerusalem. He has a Golani beret. He has a Kahana shirt, Mayor Kahana, the racist rabbi shirt. And he has a ghetto blaster under his arm, blasting out the tikva in rap. Okay, so this is the figure. And this is, I think, can be called an emblem of ethno-nationalist Judaism. His way of answering the question, what is my Judaism? How am I a Jew? Is not by tailor-making his own private version of Judaism, but in taking Judaism to be the most basic and elemental form, which is ethnos, blood. How am I Jew? How am I Jewish? Well, I'm born Jewish. And I therefore love and swear to protect everybody else who is born Jewish. I want to protect the tribe. And I therefore shout, and I'm pretty angry about anybody who isn't patriotic or nationalistic enough in my eyes. This is basically this version of Jewish identity. Now, as you can see, this Jewish identity is at tension, but I would say also complementary of the privatization of religion one. The privatization is, of course, individualistic. It's much more self-fulfillment oriented, and this is much more collectivistic and tribal. But it is also there is also a manner in which these two complement each other, because for many Israelis today, if you are patriotic enough, if you are ethno-nationalistic enough, and express it, of course, in the way you speak and in the way you vote and everything, then, well, you can do whatever you want with your Judaism. And one of the reasons that Israeli has this Jewish renaissance, this wide variety of spectrum of Jewish identities, is that many of them are anchored in this sort of ethno-nationalism on the other side, which allows for experimentation and that. So how does ethno-nationalism play out? And I brought here first a quote by a research by Tamar Hartman and others in the Israel Democracy Institute, talking there about religious Zionists that also have been taken into this identity, which has really for them replaced a halachic identity. So Tamar Hartman, if you read this, she writes that indeed they have found in the research that a more common identity or more common issue of agreement amongst religious Zionists would be politics, would be right-winged ethno-nationalist politics, than halacha. This is a more elemental, more fundamental, more communicative in that public identity issue of, I would say, Jewishness than halacha. And I think indeed you can even maybe see it in the last unification, the last sort of conglomeration of the parties to the far right of the religious Zionist party, because what unites them is less halacha and more this attitude towards the land of Israel and a right-wing attitude towards politics. And you can also have seen it in the Beit Yehudi when Naftali Bennett was its leader. The Beit Yehudi then had secular right-wingers, but would have never had a left-winged Orthodox observant member of parliament. So what is more important is your political right-wingness than your halachic observance. Sorry. This plays out also in using religious symbolism towards nationalistic ends. And I brought here two quotes, and I could have brought many more, from Likud members of Knesset talking about the temple and the Temple Mount. Look at this, Tzipi Chotoveli, who is now the deputy foreign minister. The construction of the temple in its place, this is source 7, on the Temple Mount should symbolize the renewal of the sovereignty of the people of Israel in its land. What is she saying, really? She's not saying we should construct the temple in order to pray there and sacrifice animals. And she is an Orthodox Jew. What is important for her is the sovereignty over the land of Israel. And the temple is now a symbol, or some powerhouse, I don't know, to reinforce Israel's state sovereignty over everything, I guess. This is how religious symbolism, and I know that religion and nationality in Judaism are not distinct, but still, I think the center of weight in Chotoveli's words is clear. Religious symbolism is used towards nationalistic ends, and this is what they call, again, the ethno-national Jewish identity. And finally, look at Prime Minister Netanyahu's response to the last criticism over his arranging for the Kahanist to join other parties and really probably to get into the Knesset. And he says, what hypocrisy and double standard by the left They denounce a bloc on the right, and I'm jumping to the last last sentence. They ignore that Herzog has promoted a deal with the joint list and said Arab MKs were legitimate as an addition to the government. Now, think about it. Not about how is this scandalous or not scandalous that Netanyahu actually says that Arab MKs are not legitimate for an Israeli government. These are citizens, of course, of the state. But the very fact that he thinks this is a gambit, this is a talking point that he can use. Why is that? This is because if you identify first and foremost as an ethno-nationalist Jew, for you the state of Israel is first and foremost the land of the Jews, the state of the Jews, not the state of its citizens. The basic building block of the state is no longer the citizen, it is the member of the tribe, which in our case is the Jewish tribe. And there's a collapse here from the formal, bureaucratic, democratic, republican way of understanding the state to a tribal, ethnic way of understanding the state, its structure, what we're doing here. This is also part of the religious Zionist, the ethno-nationalist, answer to the question, how am I Jewish? So these are the two major trends, and as I said, they are both in tension and complementary. Now, when we look, I will skip the ultra-Orthodox Israel. Well, maybe I'll say, I'll take a minute and say, the ultra-Orthodoxy is, for the last 20 years at least, going through a process of Israelization. Meaning, its margins, the margins of this society are getting wider and wider, and more ultra-Orthodox are allowing themselves to live in a more Israeli way, meaning, for example, getting being professionals in everyday Israeli economy, lawyers, accountants, engineers, etc. Meaning living not in secluded ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods, but in secular or semi-secular neighborhoods, etc. And this is, again, a process that allows for a very wide spectrum of Jewish identity today in Israel, and not only the fourfold division that the Central Bureau of Statistics likes to present. So this is another process that indeed is going on. But I want now to turn to the current political scene, and I've laid out the sort of logos of the different parties contending for parliament, and in the days since I did this, I updated this because Yesh Atid and Chosen L'Israel merged into Kahol Lavan, and as you must know, Habayit HaYehudi, Ha'ichud HaLeumi, and Otzma Yehudit merged into Ichud Miflagot HaYemin, right-wing party unification. Now, when we look at this map of parties, we need to ask ourselves, what is this election about? And I will try to give two answers to this. First, a very simple answer. This election is about Benjamin Netanyahu. As any election for the last 10 years was, it's about whether you like Netanyahu or hate Netanyahu in a very vehement way. That's basically it. And Netanyahu has his loyal, unwavering fans, and he has his very antagonistic opposition. And we know that, and there's no need to go into that because it's also really not very interesting. This election is really not too much about economics, and it's even not too much about the Palestinian question. Basically, of course, if you're right-wing, you have your concerns. If you're left-wing, you have your concerns, of course, and you will vote somewhat also about this. And no doubt about it. But the Palestinian question basically is settled in a way that from the one side, everybody except the extreme left and the extreme right knows what the solution will look like. Right? So some sort of partition, some sort of Palestinian state, some evacuation of some settlements. That's basically the solution on the one hand. On the other hand, there's no rush. Nobody, right now the situation in Israel is pretty calm. There's no reason to go ahead and do anything, and people don't want to go to a risky, from their angle, step if they don't have to. So really, yeah, the deal of the century, Trump's deal of the century is on the horizon, but that's not really people's concern. What is? That's the second thing this election is about, I think. It is about democratic norms, and it is about humanistic values. And really, there's nothing to accentuate that, to underline that, as Netanyahu's last gambit with the Kahanists. Many people who are going to vote Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid's party, Kahol Lavan, are doing it because they see in them the good old Israel. And when I say good old, I mean 90s. I mean Rabin. I mean sort of secular, democratically oriented, liberal, rational, militant, very tough Israel. And they want that Israel back. And the person who took that Israel from them is, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, as the head of the Likud. Netanyahu has, I think, in parallel ways that Trump is doing here, eroded the norms of the norms of governance. And again, the Kahanist thing is just a very clear example of this. But really, what he did in the Ministry of Media, what he did in Ministry of Justice, with aides, with of course his ministers that he appointed, there is a feeling amongst a wide swath of the Israeli public, mostly secular, but also some traditional, some religious Zionists, that things have gone the wrong way. That even if they agree with Netanyahu on his political answer to the Palestinian question, they're right-wing. Even so, they are very uncomfortable with the way he is molding anew the Israeli political norms. He is not giving enough weight to human rights concerns. He is not. Also the refugee, of course, problem with the Sudanese and Eritrean refugees is, if you remember on the news a few months ago, he is not giving enough concern to democratic norms. And really he is pitting different parts of public one against each other. And what Yesh Atid and what Kahol Lavan, Gantz and Lapid are offering is really, between the lines, they're offering the opposite. They're saying, we will return a steady hand to Israeli politics. We will return humanistic concern to Israeli politics. And don't worry, we're not too left-winged, or we're even a bit right-winged, depends on how convincing they are to you. And we will protect Israel, of course, just as well as Netanyahu. So I would say that's basically what is about in this election, and you can also see how the processes that I outlined, and with this I will end, have played out here, because this whole new trend of, or 30 years old really, trend of a liberal, humanistic, divergent, multifaceted Jewish identity is on the side of Kahol Lavan, of Yesh Atid, who are definitely not anti-religious and even have religious observant Orthodox people in their party. And the ethno-nationalist Jewish identity is more in the camp of the Likud and its satellite parties. And you can understand Israeli politics better if you notice how these two trends play out. And again, I will say, nobody is only this or only that. Of course, they coalesce and they have many intersections. But in general, you can see that there is a liberal humanistic trend and an ethno-national trend, and this plays out very nicely in these elections, I think.
Nice, thank you. You saw that a lot of the questions we got from our participants were about church-state issues.
Okay.
That's clearly something that North American rabbis care about. And yet, when Israelis are going to the polls in April, is that a priority for them? If it's not, why?
Okay. Religion and state questions are always somewhere in the background, and they always are significant. When you actually vote, you usually vote about security, and as I said right now, you vote about the general characteristic of our society, I would say. Yeah. But religion and state is always there, and if you noticed Benny Gantz speaking in his very first speech to the public as a contender, and if you, of course, Yair Lapid for a long time has spoken, and also Avi Gabay, the head of Labour Party right now, also when he spoke for the first time, all of them mentioned religion and state, and all of them mentioned that they will place some reforms in religion and state, making them more liberal, making the chief rabbinate less of a monopolistic force, and catering to some needs and wants of the public, maybe first and foremost some sort of civil marriage or some other replacement, but something similar to that. And because, as I said, the public, most of it is somewhere completely different than the situation, than the former legal situation right now. I mean, if 60 and even more % of the public want civil marriage or are willing to have civil marriage, if more than 60% of the public are willing to have in Israel LGBT marriage, it's obvious that the way the law is, the formal legal situation in Israel is not up to date with the public. And so all center and left parties will state that, and because it's important for their voters to hear. So it plays a part. It plays a part, again, as part of the privatization of religion trend. Will people vote only about that? No. They have other bigger concerns. And this, by the way, is why the legal situation has not changed until now, because always there is a coalition that there is not enough power for the voices who want to change it.
So then I think when we hear that that's the growing trend, 60% plus want that, I think there's this natural question, well, if Netanyahu continues to build these governments by going right, why isn't the center and center left, why aren't they being more successful in looking left to build an even bigger coalition and get enough seats to win the government?
Well, it's quite simple. Again, people will not vote for that that's not their highest concern. Their highest concern will be security and will be some sort of identity that they want the Israeli society to project or to take on, and the left does not get enough seats in the parliament. That's pretty simple. We know that survey after survey shows that a minority of Israelis consider themselves even left, about 15% or 20%. This is very low. Another great chunk consider themselves the center, maybe 30% or something like that, and then, or 40, and then there's the right? And then there's ultra-Orthodox also. But but they just don't have enough seats. So what Kahol Lavan, what Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid are trying to do is to play the center, get enough votes to be the biggest party there, if possible, to be able to get 60 out of 120 parliament seats, and then that's it there, because Netanyahu will not be able to form a government, and they will because they have a bit more options also with parties of the right, and if not, maybe even to form the next government with the Likud, but them as the leaders. Right. That's also possible. And then there's this big secular center-right chunk that forms the government.
So if you had to predict, how likely do you think that's going to happen? How likely do you think that will happen, that they'll be successful?
There's a good chance. There's a good chance, but really it's I mean, I wouldn't even be sure the day before the election, because as the last election, Netanyahu changed the face of the vote the day before. I mean, with the Arabs are coming in thrones. We remember that. That changed the election, among other things. And really we will not know. But there is a very good chance, because there are, first of all, Kahol Lavan has actual right-wing people inside. And these are them themselves, and they represent right-wing constituency that is tired of Netanyahu, tired of Netanyahu's way in politics, in actual character in politics, and want center or center-right. And they will vote for Kahol Lavan, so there is a chance that the Likud will lose some power, some votes according to that.
So then, as I'm hearing you talk, I think so much of what our experience, or what my experience here is a deep move towards universalism, again, away from particularism, a fear actually of tribalism, a personal fear. I hope I don't seem tribal. And yet you're describing with this trend of ethno-nationalism the exact opposite. In fact, an embrace of it, that is a replacement of one's Jewish identity. So given that break in trends between, just stereotypically between the two communities, what does that mean for the North American Jewish community's relationship with the Israeli Jewish community?
Right. So first of all, remember that I charted out two major trends. Of course, the trend that is a sort of a privatization of religion, the trend that searches for its own expression of Judaism, has no problem, not only has no problem with American Judaism, but is quite receptive to it and wants to collaborate with it. And again, as I said, the non-Orthodox established denominations in Israel have grown quite a lot over the last 20 years, even more. And so certainly quite a large chunk of the Israeli populace has no problem, and even a positive attitude that was not there before. Because when we were Hebrew, when we were that sort of secular, socialist, militant identity, the go-to religious service people for us were the Orthodox, and they were considered the authentic expression of Judaism. And that's no longer the case. So there's a great opening for possibilities. Nice. On the other hand, there is certainly tribalism, certainly ethno-nationalism, and this is certainly a very robust and contemporary way to define, for people to define their Jewishness. And that also holds maybe two angles. One, well, since I care about the Jewish tribe, I obviously care also about Jews who are not only in Israel. And indeed, if you have noticed in the nation-state law that was very controversial, there is a clause there about Israel's duty to take care of diaspora Jews, right? And that's also part of ethno-nationalism. On the other hand, of course, this is is far from the value ethos of American Jews. It is tribal. It is many times not liberal or anti-liberal. It many times rejects universal criteria or standards for legal matters, for army matters, for judicial, etc. And yes, this will be in conflict with the ethos that is prevalent in American Jewish circles.
So then one of our questions we had was, so why should North American Jews care about these elections? If a member of our community says, is this really Klal Yisrael anymore? Why should I, what does this matter to me? How would you answer?
Yeah, well, I can't, I can't be responsible for people's attitude towards Israel. If you said goodbye, goodbye to you, I mean, what can I say? But pragmatically, should American Jews care about these elections? Yes, I think if there will be another prime minister, not Netanyahu, from the center left, I think, to give a very simple example, the Kotel agreement will be back on the table and ratified and done. There's no really something that will stop a government, let's say, led by Kahol Lavan with the Likud there, with the ultra-Orthodox having a lot less power, if at all. That can be arranged. Civil marriage or something similar maybe will be there, and the whole attitude towards American Jews, at least the non-Orthodox ones, can actually change overnight. So yes, I think it should be very interesting.
Nice. So we've seen so much, in at least domestically in the Jewish media, around Netanyahu's decision to gather the kind of Kahana elements into a potential coalition. I've seen so much rhetoric in this week. This is a red line. This has really changed my feelings. Is that also something you think Israelis are feeling? I mean, beyond a politically strategic choice, does it feel like a line's been crossed for them as well? And do you think that ultimately could lose him the election?
I would say yes and yes. I would say this is a dramatic step. This is something that really, Kahana, of course, racism in our society is taboo. Yeah. And Kahana is the symbol of Jewish racism. And he is taboo at the center of taboo. And to make him legitimate, to rehabilitate him, or his students here, these are people who expressly identify as students of Rabbi Kahana. And these are people who, Benzi Gupstein of that party talked explicitly about burning churches in Israel. You should go and burn churches. Rambam said, he would say, right? And this is like violence and outright racism like never before seen. And again, I'm saying because it's not, we don't lack racism even without these Kahanists. There is here and there, and of course. But this is racism that is not ashamed to be racist. It's a clear crossing of the taboo. And doing this is, I think, really for many people a step too far. Even for people from the Likud, and certainly for people from religious Zionism. Religious Zionism also, and Netanyahu didn't arrange for the Kahanists to come to his party, the Likud. He arranged them to come to the religious Zionist party. Religious Zionism has for years said, Kahana, this is not us, right? We have our opinions about the Judea and Samaria, we have our opinions about the Palestinians, but we're not that, right? And you can analyze why they did this, and there are some logical reasons and some psychological reasons, but doesn't matter. But the fact is that was beyond the pale. And for them to accept them into their house, into the Jewish house, metaphorically and not, is really a break, is really something is fractured there. And for many, and I know my extended family is not only settlers but religious Zionists, and they have a problem voting for Beit HaYehudi now. I mean, maybe they will vote, but it's a crisis. And I think this will stain Netanyahu and certainly religious Zionism. Netanyahu's career will probably be over the next few years anyway because of his trial and indictments. But this will stain religious Zionism for years to come because they have broken the taboo and they have accepted Kahana. And I think, and we're even really just beginning to process this in Israel. Beginning to actually understand, really, yes, he is bringing Kahana into parliament willingly. And see, still the repercussions are not felt, but I think there is a chance that this will have a negative effect for the Likud in these elections.
Well, I think that's, in its own way, an optimistic note to end on. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope that you gained some insight, some things to follow up on, and some pieces to share with your communities. I want to really encourage you, if this just felt good this morning or whenever you end up watching this and you want more, tomorrow is the deadline to register for this summer to be part of the 10-day Rabbinic Torah study seminar. The early bird deadline, at least, is tomorrow. We'll be exploring nationalism and tribalism in a global era, which was very much along the lines of what Dr. Persico discussed this morning. So if you were on the fence, go online, register, book your tickets, join us in Jerusalem this summer. I think there's going to be just even more nuance to the conversation. Thank you again for sharing your wisdom and your insights. Join us for more webinars in the future. Thank you. Goodbye.